Alright, so we just finished the Pythagorean theorem. We're going to move on to section 8.3, and this is called special right triangles. Now these are really cool. You may not think so, but I like them. Special right triangles. Now, it's easy to solve a right triangle when you know two sides, because you can just do the Pythagorean theorem to learn the third side. But what we're going to learn today and the rest of this week and next week is how to solve triangles when we don't know two sides and we only know one side. So there's two kinds of special right triangles. One is called a 45, 45, 90 right triangle, and the other is called a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So we're going to do them both side by side. So here we go. The first one we're going to draw is a 45, 45, 90 right triangle, and those numbers refer to the angle measurement. So if you're not sure, that's going to be a triangle that has its two acute angles the same measurement. Now, if that's true, if these two angles are the same, if they're both 45 degrees, and this one's 45 degrees, hopefully you remember that that means these sides are the same, right? So a 45, 45, 90 triangle is also called an isosceles right triangle. So if you see those words, it also means 45, 45, 90. Now, I'm just going to go right into this because I think the best way to learn this is to practice it. The sides of a 45, 45, 90 triangle always follow a specific pattern. So whatever this side is, the other 45-degree angle side is also the same measurement. And the hypotenuse is always that same measurement times the square root of 2. Okay? It's just a pattern, and we're going to learn it very quickly and very efficiently. Now, a 30, 60, 90 triangle looks a little different. It doesn't have two sides that are the same. So here's our right angle. The smaller angle is the 30-degree angle. The bigger angle is the 60-degree angle. And these sides also follow a pattern. So the smallest angle is across from the smallest side. So that's this side down here. This smallest side is going to tell us what the rest of the sides are. So whatever the smallest side is, the hypotenuse is 2 times that smallest side. And this longer leg over here, across from the 60, is whatever that smaller side is, times the square root of 3. Now I realize this makes absolutely no sense, and at this point in your life is probably the most useless thing you've ever seen. But we're going to do a couple of examples, and I hope it's going to get a little clearer. So here go our examples. All right, I'm going to draw a triangle, another 45, 45, 90 triangle. So here is our 45, 45, 90. So we'll put 45, 45, and 90. And then I'm going to go around and label the sides, and we're going to see if we can figure out how long everything is. So this is 10, this will be X, and this will be Y. Now, as you get better at these, you'll get faster at them. But first we're going to do it so slow, like you don't understand any of it, and we're going to take baby steps. The best way to learn this on every problem is to redraw the 45, 45, 90 pattern. And then you ask yourself, what does the side I know match up to in my 45, 45, 90 pattern? And you'll see that the 10 and the X are in the same spot. So what that means is this X this X equals 10. But that also means that this one is 10, right? So this is 10 and this is 10. Now, don't get confused when you're doing your problems. The X's that you just drew in your little picture are not always the X in the problem. See, I could have made this X and this Y, and then it would have been a lot more confusing. So don't get mixed up with which X's you're working with. All we know here is that this 10 corresponds to this x. So if this is 10, this has to be 10, so this has to be 10. So in our specific problem here, x equals 10. And now I'm talking about this x, not these two x's. Okay? Y right here corresponds to x square root of 2. So y equals x times the square root of 2. But we already know that this x is this x, and this x is 10, right? And so this is 10, this is 10, so this y equals 10 times the square root of 2. So x equals 10, y equals 10 times the square root of 2. All right? Don't worry, it will get better and easier. So now we're doing an example of a 30, 60, 90. Go ahead and draw our triangle. It's going to have a 30 and a 60. The 30 is always the small one, 60 is the bigger one. Now, just because you see a triangle with a small angle and a big angle, that doesn't mean it's a 30, 60, 90. It just means that it has a small angle and a big angle. All right, so we have 2, we have x, and we have y. Now remember, the strategy every time is to redraw the little pattern. Okay, so here's the little pattern, and it goes x, 2x, x times the square root of 3. Here's a great example of what I'm talking about. In our problem, we need to find x, right? Well, in our little crummy picture we drew, there's also an x. Those are not the same x, okay? This down here is just for your memory, for you to figure it out and solve the problems. It's not the x's from the actual problem. So in our picture, the 2 corresponds to the x value in our little picture, right? So this is 2. Well, over here, in this little picture we drew, the x is 2, so this side is 2 times the square root of 3. And this side is 2 times x, so it's 2 times 2, which is 4. So back to our problem now. It's like we stepped into our little sketch for a minute. Now we're going back to our regular problem. X equals 2 times the square root of 3, and y equals 4. Okay? Not so bad. I promise after a couple thousand examples, it'll seem a lot easier. So we're going to do a couple more. We're not going to do 1,000 actually. We're just going to do 2 more. So now let's draw the weird right triangle that nobody likes to look at. Probably because it's not actually a right triangle. It's a terrible picture I drew, but there it is. All right, we're going to go around and label. So this will be x, this will be x, this will be 8. All right, so when we see that these two sides are the same, that means this is an isosceles triangle. When we see the right angle here, that means it's an isosceles right triangle. That means it's a 45. That means it's a 45, 45, 90 right triangle, and it's going to follow this pattern. This pattern of x, x, x square root 2. So when we look, we see that the 8 and the x square root of 2 go together. That doesn't look as easy as the last time, because all we've figured out here is that the x times the square root of 2 equals 8. So to figure that out and solve it, we're going to have to start doing algebra. Divide both sides by the square root of 2 and get x equals 8 over square root of 2. Well, that's no good because you can't have that on the bottom. We've been practicing that. So square root of 2 times the square root of 2 equals 2, and 8 times the square root of 2 is 8 square root of 2. But now we have 8 over 2, which is 4, because we can change 8 to 4 and 2 to 1. So 4 square root of 2 is what the x right here equals. Now in this case, it's the same x, so it's okay. So x equals 4 times the square root of 2. But you see what I meant about not the x doesn't always match up with the x from your picture, right? Remember this example? It didn't work. This example, it did. So just pay attention to what you're doing. Last example. All right, so now we're going to label it. We have our 30, our 60. Go around and put some lengths. So here's 18, it's Y, and this is X. Remember, first thing to do, draw your chinchy little triangle. Doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be precise. It just has to help you remember the pattern. So there's X, 2X, and X square root 3. All right, so we go around and we look and say, what does the 18 match up to? Well, it's across from the hypotenuse, so the 18 matches up to the 2x. So that means 2x equals 18. Now remember that x is this x. So we divide by 2, we get x equals 9. Okay, so this is 9. But this matches up to this x, right? So in this case, in this problem, we're good to say that, okay, x is 9. Or y matches up to this side, the x square root of 3. So y equals x times the square root of 3. So 9 times the square root of 3. I know this is confusing. It's pretty complicated. We will practice it a lot. We're going to do it for 3 days. I will help you with it, and you will get better at it. Trust me.